Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, no matter where you are. Welcome to One-on-One. I've got a great guest here today, Gordon Mitchell. He's the co-founder and chief strategy officer with a company called Holus. They get into a lot of things with the digital environment and how that relates to FM, as well as Gordon is active in the development of ISO standards for FM and various other areas, including digital. And he's also member and the chair of the IWFM, the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management, for the Technology Special Interest Group. So he's certainly the guy to talk to when it comes to all things digital, FM, and beyond. So I'm happy to have him for our guest today for the hour. We will have like a structured sort of going through some sets of questions and things and the various topics, and then we'll have a Q&A at the very end. You can post them in the Q&A, and I'll take them from there. But certainly, we may answer some questions before we get there. But otherwise, like I say, welcome, Gordon. Happy to have you here.
Happy to be with you, Wayne. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I guess just to start off, I mean, for those that don't aware of you, just you've spent decades in the working in built environment, information, operations, all those key areas. For those that aren't familiar with your journey, what would you say would do describe the core thread that's kind of in your career that connects your career to fast forward to where you are today and say the last 20, 30 years?
I, I, I guess the core theme would be I've always believed in the value proposition that FM affords, not necessarily as it's understood commonly, but I guess I believe its capability to support not just you know, the demand organization, but society generally and the planet beyond. It's one of the most um in its zenith, it has an ability to connect things in ways that are quite difficult for other sectors or industries to do.
Mhm.
But in and of ourselves, we're quite disconnected, so therefore we fail to deliver on that promise. So that would be the common theme, and obviously digital and technology and data as parts of
Sure.
how we achieve that.
Yeah, on that, you've been vocal throughout, like about FM being undervalued, and certainly I know that from my own experience. In the profession, it's not always been recognized for what it is and can be. That's come a long way, even in the last say 5 or 10 years, as far as the key role FM plays, how it integrates with asset management and all of that. It's not just running, the hard and soft services and running, keeping the lights on. It's much more than that. And of course, when there's a problem or a crisis, FM is key, but a lot of people don't realize that till that happens. But what do you specifically think is broken in how organizations structure and govern FM today that still has a ways to go?
I mean, it's not scoped very well, and therefore it's not contracted appropriately.
Mhm.
Right at the front end of it. I mean, as I see more generally, maybe in terms of the built environment than just FM per se, I would say there's two key problem areas. There's a lot more than two, but there's two that cause big impacts from what they're doing wrong. And one's the informed client, is a few and far between entity. So
True.
if you don't know what to ask for, your scope isn't going to include it, and therefore you're unlikely to get it. And the handover, soft landings, digital delivery, whatever term you want to put on it,
Mhm.
that's I'm working at the moment with hundreds of millions of pounds of new capital projects and zero digital delivery. And they reckon at that point in time, about 30 to 40% of the life cycle value will disappear, the life cycle value of
Mhm.
information. So if you don't get it right then, you're forever chasing your tail. So I think to me those are critical kind of issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, information failure leads to asset failure. Like I say, it's process and not having the right information to make the right decisions. It also sense a disconnect between like sort of the operational sense of FM and as that relates to the asset management. It's always been looked at somewhat siloed and sort of it's only maybe recent in the last number of years where there's more of a tighter integration, whether depending on the type of FM model and organization. Obviously, a larger organization can have the maybe the bench strength and resources internally to sort of mitigate that and sort of address that. But for the most part, a lot of companies don't even, lucky if they even get that part of it till it's too late.
I mean, the thing that I think lots of people don't maybe appreciate nor understand is FM is quite a young profession.
Hmm.
People think of FM, associate it with buildings, and think of, the buildings have been around for thousands of years type idea. But as an
Yeah.
actual defined discipline, it's very difficult for any profession to mature before it's defined. And in essence, facility management came out of the 1960s. So, you had things like computer science, which is older
Hmm.
as a profession, and we think of it as quite a new thing. But FM, as you know, Wayne, didn't get its first internationally sort of recognized management system standard until 2018. And it's only just now
True.
going through its very first
Yeah,
system
and the asset
review.
management preceded that, the 55,000 series, that was always, and that seems to be have always garnered much more, well, I wouldn't say, I guess adoption as well, but also just more recognition of, that that's what you have to do. But they realize the FM is, feeds into that, is certainly supports that. But you're right, that's after long after that. So even when you sort of check and see for accreditations in that asset management, there's much more people out there doing, that sort of stuff on the 55,000. Now 41,000 has come a long way too, for sure, to be sure. But that is relatively young for an adoption of it. And prior to that, I guess, like I say, the 70s and the 80s, as far as the various associations globally that support FM, that has evolved too. And probably, if you had to say, a lot of that's in the last, 10 or 15 years. So it's not a long time, true.
Well, I mean, next year we celebrate, if that's the word I can use, but the 25th anniversary of European facility management and the 15th year anniversary of ISO, International Facility
Hmm.
Management. So you're right. We only got our first standard in the management system capacity published in 2018, but the actual technical committee that provided that piece of work has only been in existence 14 years just now.
Yeah.
So that's no time at all, is it? And the professional
No.
bodies, obviously, as you say, preceded that. But again, it's the point of standards are things that we can collectively agree things look like. And if you can't define that commonality, it's, as I say, it's very difficult to mature into more optimal models. But at the same point in time, if you've not got a mature environment that's as complex as facilities management, then it becomes a difficult thing to communicate to the C-suite.
No,
And that's where I
absolutely.
think we suffer as a profession. We're not very good at the storytelling side of facility management.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Too busy running the place to be strategic, or like you say, or actually sell it to those that need to be have that awareness, being made aware of it. What do you see as when you founded Holus, and what did your purpose? I mean, obviously you were doing things prior to that, but Holus has opened up as just not just a digital sense, but where do you what was the main sort of catalyst for when you opened up Holus and to get that moving forward?
I guess I worked on a lot of facility management projects and with clients, but the digital integration within those estates and assets were poor. So in that regard, I decided that, to set up my own business to specifically target digital operations. So, we've talked about the ISOs 55,000, which is around asset management, and 41,001, which is the facility management system structure.
Hmm.
So you have things like ISO 9001, which is the most used standard in the world, which is around quality management, but it's a management system approach. So the idea of all these ISOs is that you have this commonality to the structural architecture, which then means you should be able to apply that model to your operational practices. That's all really what Holus aims to do is take the structure, the rigor, the models, and be able to apply it to, the end assets, the end transactions, and connect that to drive outcomes. And that, as I say, was done, in my opinion, very poorly. But I would say, on reflection, we have a lot of um, technology vendor-driven innovation,
Hmm.
and we've surveyed in the Institute of Workplace and Facility Management that you mentioned earlier on. There was a survey carried out which showed that 80% of those innovation projects in our sector failed to deliver a return on investment. So that was a clear problem. And having worked in the digital side at scale for quite some time with some mega projects, the obvious how much value was escaping kind
Hmm.
of then showed me there was a real need for a solution like Holus. And over the last few years, I've started doing a lot of um, kind of I'm one of my other roles is international liaison with artificial intelligence for
Hmm.
international standards,
Yeah.
and trying to then start to look at how do we usher in an information foundationed operating model with agentic overlays
Hmm.
and all of that type of stuff sort of led me to think, well, you need organizations to be able to govern and usher in this new capability in a safe, structured, sustainable way. And I just seen absolutely almost zero of that out there. So I thought, this is somewhere where A, I can, there is a need, but B, it fits with me and my organization's skills, and
Sure.
B, it's something, quite exciting and to be involved in.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, when you said it's vendor driven, I mean, obviously some of the bigger players that would have the resources that would say, "Hey, there's a market opportunity here," and it is unfortunate, even given those companies initiating those projects and where that fell down. And like you say, you get a high sort of a failure rate, if you want to call it, or a lack of investment on return, which is same return on investment is the same thing. Is the standardization or the lack thereof that sort of evolved, and there was competing standards, and then sort of you get all this kind of wrangling about until finally things kind of crystallize. I mean, it comes to the point of ISO standards too, standardizing something, taking best practice, pooling it together. But if you're going to have a set standard or something more outside of the objective based prescriptive base, you want to have something that's going to serve everybody, not and that's going to serve them well, not just something that the majority, or something that works, or something that's flexible and adaptable. And of course, like a moving target with technology, so it's trying to adopt that, and then it has to be flexible and be a dynamic document that's updated over time. So that's part of what you're in, which is great, because it's overwhelming even for the tech savvy in the FM world to say, I'm going to make a decision for my company. We're going to do a digital transformation. Well, what does that mean? And what does that, I mean, if you're in the Microsoft world, they have all kinds of things to support that, but maybe you've got other environment and things you have to support. So it really is a very complex situation, and I sensed it was lacking in support of that. That ties into the FM mandate, which is something that Holus absolutely does as part of its core existence and strategy. So that's a great
Well,
place to be.
part of this is, when we stand together, we stand stronger. From an information standpoint, you can have the greatest information architecture, but if it isn't interoperable across the world around you or your supply chain, then it can actually become a hindrance rather than a help. So
Mhm.
you want that exchange, information exchange, to flow really clean across your entire portfolio. And in essence, that's where things like I'm in my vice chair of digital operations with NEMA, which is the UK's National Programme for Information Management.
Mhm.
That's where we work with the Cabinet Office in the United Kingdom and public sector stock, to try and bring some of that commonality. You know, if at the moment in the United Kingdom we've got an asset backlog of 49 billion. So, you know, these aren't small numbers.
No,
Our National Health Service has got 15.9 billion of that. So these are things where that commonality, at the same point in time, and I've said this into people inside the NHS, if you can imagine from a facility management digital estates point of view, if a thing like a National Health Service can get information savvy and able to draw that into their operational practice, they could very quickly across their supply chain start a national circular economy. And that's what
hmm
I mean when I was saying earlier on about facility management realizing its potential. That's the kind of things we can instigate when we get more digitally capable. At the moment, we're looking at sometimes, just the asset maintenance and that backlog and things that, are administrative drains. We can be defining new ways of cities and buildings functioning to societal betterment. And that's, really exciting to be involved in.
absolutely. I mean, it just seems like there's just such a huge demand that will never usurp the resources that can supply it. I mean, over the next 10 or 20 years, what's actually on a priority sense of what needs to be done. Is it I mean, it's not economics are there. I mean, certainly it's viable. What is it more the awareness of it and convincing sort of that this is a successful path or
I think, and what we're doing in the UK space at the moment, and some within the international work that you and I are involved in, is trying to take. Nobody wants to be, you know, have all these standards thrown at them. They don't make sense. Some
no.
people aren't even aware that they exist. So I'm saying this to you because we stand on a similar or the same rather international technical committee. But to the 99% of the facility management professionals out there, it needs to be a much more pragmatic, plain language version of the same. What is it? Why does it do this? What's the benefits to me? What's the outcomes I get? What's the risks? What's the implications? Much more language like that.
hmm
So it becomes more of a pragmatic business case rather than, I mean, don't get me wrong. If the tender that you want to win has a requirement for compliance with X, Y, or Z, it's a different matter because now
Right.
it's a necessity and you will not get the piece of work you're looking for without having compliance with whatever standard that might be. For the
hmm
rest of the world, the standards themselves are vehicles to some kind of business outcome. And they're again to chuck another standard into the pot. The new one we're working at international level, which is called ISO 41031. But
Yeah.
forget the numbers. What that's about is it's about an operational framework for the digital requirements of a modern FM. So it's trying to let you understand how asset classifications connect to your operating model, connect to things like your strategic goals.
hmm
I don't necessarily care about ISO 19650 or this, that, and the next thing. But I do care about my budgets. I do
hmm
care about my organization's requirements.
What does it mean to me? Yeah.
100%. And that's what
Yeah.
we need to do more of as standards experts, is make it accessible to our communities. But at the end of the day, these things are there to be accelerators towards a better operating outcome.
Yeah, all these supporting, you're right, all these supporting standards and this sort of development of things as it evolves is all great work and great stuff, but not everybody understands what that means. And they say, well, sounds like a good initiative, like the artificial intelligence too, that itself has its own ISO standard evolving and other things, but these all tie into. And the good thing about the standards are not, it's not, as I know from being involved as well in the ISO development on the FM, is you have a certain standard, like you mentioned, 31 that's coming up, that will be coming up, but it references the other standards, FM and otherwise, to pull into that. So it's pooling all of the best practice and knowledge, ISO standards as well, of course, and bringing it in to provide like a clear guidance about a roadmap. So it's something that's can be adopted, understood, embraced, and adopted. And you got to bring that right into the C-suite because that's where the decisions for the to release those kinds of funds to facilitate that, right? I mean, you can only do so much as in charge of your domain in FM or whatever, but we're not talking something localized. We're talking something that integrates within driving the organization and making it a success. So that's an integral part of outcomes of where that's based. It's not just something that's localized, wins that you have, like, running the FM show kind of thing. So you raise a
Yeah, I
great
mean,
point.
some standards are for baseline, some standards are for pathways, some standards are for destinations.
Hmm.
And this goes back to the immaturity of FM. Some standards take years to develop. For Technical Committee 267, which is facility management,
Yep.
we have about 88% of the world's GDP in our membership. That's a lot of things to consider against. We've got,
Absolutely.
from Saudi Arabia to China to Brazil, the United Kingdom, Canada. I mean, these are very different parts of our world with subtly nuanced needs. So that's why these things take so much time because we need to make sure it works for everybody. At the moment, there's a piece of work going on um, in the world of standards that the translation into French is meaning that the term has been problematic. So they're looking at changing the way the world approaches it so that that it's easier to, in essence, translate into different languages. So these
Hmm.
are considerations that if you're in your own organization, you don't necessarily need to think about them because you'll operate in a default principal language, which will be Spanish or,
Hmm.
English or whatever it might be, and everyone that works for you has to, you know, toe into that sort of structure and approach. But standards have to be a bit more impartial than any one country. So we do try. I mean, that one of the in the early days of my time, I was even going down the rabbit hole of the differences of Brazilian Portuguese and Portuguese. So these things do get do get complicated.
More than just nuances, yeah. And it's consistency. You're absolutely right, because there's no point in having something that's, an international standard, which is not consistent. It has to be in order to make that happen. It's not as easy as it might appear. Like, outside of, like you say, whatever the predominance is of the language or the culture, it has to be, it has to serve everybody. So therefore you have to overcome those sort of, I guess, obstacles. But I mean, with the local input and support, I mean, that's not insurmountable. I mean, that's the whole point of engagement participation is to resolve those differences or those challenges. So that's not an impediment to, I mean, in the adoption and certainly in those specific areas.
yeah, I mean, at the moment I guess we're kind of maturing around taxonomy, but we we are emerging into, I guess, more, the types of concepts like knowledge graphs and ontologies, and there's a lot of work
Hmm.
going on around that just now. The UK's typically speaking in this type of space been one of the kind of pioneers of it.
Hmm.
Um, so that's afforded me insight into a lot of the leading thinking and the leaders, importantly. You,
Sure.
you learn a lot from people, don't you? Not just a
Yeah,
standard.
absolutely.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
no, that's. That's the key. What is the adoption when you say 41,001? Like I said, it's still relatively new as far as, and I don't mean certification. I don't think, getting to certification is the be all and end all, and you necessarily have to do that. I would certainly encourage, companies to do that, but they don't, it's not like an all or nothing approach. It's basically you can adopt it and reap the rewards and benefits. And I just know this from my own experience in the consulting and with clients that are doing that. But the certification is, yeah, maybe down the road in a few years, but you don't have to sort of, that doesn't have to be the ultimate goal, if you will. And not just because of the cost and the administration to facilitate that, but you know, just the adoption and saying, well, let's get some best, do a gap analysis. Let's get adoption of these best practices. Let's do some things. And you increase your FM maturity. You're farther along the path than not doing anything at all, or just an ad hoc approach of whatever you decide to do that given year. Where do you see that now moving forward, the adoption in the UK or otherwise, 41,001?
I would hope that the current review will support what you're describing because, experience is the best teacher at the end of the day, and
Yeah.
41,001 had no experience. It had no forebearer. It had what was called the Magnificent Seven in Europe once upon a time was the foundation of what became the management system standard. But
Hmm.
I think we've now had, 5, 6 years of people using it. I certainly fed in a significant sort of digital dimension addition to mean that it's, more machine readable and more helpful to digital transformation, if you like.
Yeah.
But I think with any of these things, it's a bit about the marketing of it as well. I would say like I said earlier on about the storytelling.
Hmm.
You kind of need. We can talk about the value of it, but ideally, you need a client to be talking about how it's helped them in actual value, demonstrable, tangible, provable value.
Absolutely.
And to your point, I mean, accreditation, you know, if it's for you and it's right size, that's great. But you don't have to want to get accredited to procure an ISO or a British or a European or a Canadian standard, as it were.
Hmm.
At the end of the day, for a couple of hundred euros or dollars, Great British pounds, whatever, Canadian dollars, it'll be a bit more. But for that type of spend, you
Exactly.
can get, what for what a room full of international experts have worked on for 18 months.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's a very good point. That's an excellent point. And one thing I will say, and there again, I just brief digress to my engagement, and that was actually talking to Stan, to your dad, back in 2018. I was consulting for a client, major oil company, and they were consolidating FM, and that's when I heard about 41,001 2018. And I said, well, this sounds like something, definitely would be, adopt best practice. But it was just just came out in April. This was just after. So it had just been released. So very, very fresh. But I thought good. And I actually your dad was kind of had a good chat with them there. I was on site locally there and in the end of the day at the client site in the Maritimes there. And they just said, well, what the best thing they want to put together a strategic plan because I was looking at their, FM strategy. And of course,
Yeah.
41,000 was part of that, but it's much more than that. And said, want to get these guys because they didn't really it's a big oil company. They were like, oh, they didn't have like a really FM department. So we just consolidated everything. And that's when I got involved. And I've noticed from then, and then that's where I got actually involved. He says, well, did you know at the end of our call, he said, did you know why does Canada not have representation like the mirror committees, things like that? And I was
Yeah.
actually astounded, like, because, obviously the UK, the US, the UK has been obviously well in the forefront of that for years. And we didn't have any, long story short, we got into that process and with his support as well. And we got started the Canada Mirror Committee and we got for engagement. So, having people engaged for sure. But what I've noticed is since I've been involved in it and the Mirror Committee, which is in 2022 now, or 2021, whenever it was, is the amount of the development of standards. What used to take like in the cycle, because I know in the cycle of ISO standards, it's like, you've got 18 months within to do whatever, and you can maybe shorten up those time frames on all those processes. But it used to take a lot longer to get things. Now there's more. Like when I look at the number of standards that have come forth, and even in the last 3 or 4 years, and where we get to get those resolved and published, there seems to be that window has shrunk, which is a good thing. So we have more that's coming out. If you want to look at it from a throughput sort of perspective, would you agree that that's sort of supporting the industry in that regard?
Yeah, I think like building anything, you need to
Yeah,
put your foundations in. It's much easier to start building additional things once you can build off that foundation. And we didn't have that foundation, as I mentioned earlier on. So the fact now is you can specialize a little more. You can do a lot more variety in more niche areas because you don't need to lay those foundations anymore. And I would
yeah,
expect as time goes on, the finishing parts will grow even more. There's two things: is the maturity of the work, and then there's the need.
hmm
So, as it stands just now, we've had periods of time where we've been working on one international standard, as you've mentioned. At the moment, facility management's working on four.
hmm
At the same point in time, at the moment, because of the need, the demand from industry, in information management and BIM as an international environment's working on 12 standards simultaneously. And
hmm
also at the moment, again, need driving it. Artificial intelligence, when I last looked, was working on 47 standards
Wow.
simultaneously. So, we're the world's kind of chasing its tail a bit on AI, and it's obviously a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's why there's so much activity. I mean, as I'm liaison there, I can't. It's difficult to keep up with that amount of activity, I have to say.
hmm
You know yourself, four's enough to try and keep up with. At 47 is just
No,
ridiculous.
no, that's almost I mean, you need an AI, an agent assistance just to do to do that, much less be, whatever you're going to jump in and dive into yourself to be immersed and engaged. I mean, yeah, you're right. And I guess that therein lies the conundrum. It's the support and getting that support and encouraging that. And the mandate's always been there, but it's getting those that are going to, participate and contribute, like to so these things evolve. People with the subject matter experts like yourself, and as they say, hey, yeah, great idea. I have a lot to, here's what, and pooling that together. The more people, and I guess that has risen. I haven't looked at that from the stats, but as far as committees, and if you look at it just in the general sense, I'm in the FM, but outside of the other ones you mentioned, is there more and more people like in ISO, like they have, like it doesn't have to be like the committee members, but just the outreach and the participation to those evolve? Is there more activity now than there was maybe say 2 or 3 years ago, and which is I would guess driven by demand, but would you say there's more people that are actually engaged in sort of supporting that mandate moving forward?
I think the industry is maturing, and therefore that maturity requires more structure and therefore standards. So
Hmm
I do think there's a trend in that direction. Obviously, how much of an impact of not being under lockdown now may be
Yeah,
impacting on some of that as well. It's difficult in the trending of data to not have the anomaly of what that did to us all.
true.
But yeah, I think this year, in a digital FM sense, I wouldn't really have said what I'm about to say about last year, but this year I've felt a different level of ask from my clients, a different, kind of need from industry for this. We've had a number of significantly large entities really saying we totally agree with what we've stood up in the United Kingdom, and this makes a lot of sense. How do we kind of progress our own journeys? And in essence, these asks didn't really come out of last year. I mean, for us, we replaced what was called our BIM Level 2 environment with the Information Management Initiative on November 2024. We published that.
Okay.
So it's had, 18 months of kind of, establishing itself. And as I say, I would probably say that it took about 12 months for that to sort of settle in. But
Hmm.
yeah, the last 6 months and certainly this year I've seen, even things like webinars that I've done. I've with the institute that I mentioned earlier on, we
Yep.
we, we do quite a lot of webinars and things like that. And I would normally get, say 50 people along, and we did one specifically on information management and the good practice guide that I had authored, and we got 200.
Wow.
And
That shows you, yeah, that you're getting more momentum, and you're getting a more educated client as well. I mean, all these FM these people that are attending, they're coming back now with with a higher level of awareness and information is what that means in their domain in their with their company and how they can adopt and move this forward and benefit. So it's just one thing is selling the benefits, then it's like, how do I go about it? That sort of thing. On that note, what do you say define agentic AI? You get all these, things being thrown around as the methods and processes, but how do you see define agentic AI in the operational or FM context? Just high level.
Well, I mean, there's artificial intelligence, agents, and agentic kind of language, as it were, and they sit subtly different. But I guess the agentic, it's um when you get to things that are kind of taking that action, I guess. In a you can prompt a Chat GPT or Grok or Gemini or whatever your LLM of choice might be, and it's
Right.
very much, a back and forward thing. Whereas you have things like OpenClaw now and Hermes and I mean even Claude's brought their managed agent stuff, and Google's releasing its agent mode. So these things are starting to then, not not need as much of your input.
Hmm.
You're not working with it to shape your outcome. You're given an instruction and leaving it to deliver. And I
Yeah.
think
I mean,
that's
you still have to have as they call the human in the loop, sort of component in the process. It's not just press a
ideally,
button. Yeah.
not
It's
everyone's
not
getting it, but
automated. What's that?
I'm saying ideally you do, but there's
Yeah.
already a few
Uh,
disaster
It can get
stories
away
out
on you
there.
if you're not careful. I mean, that's why I say, and when you look at it, you have to look at the architecture and the process. It's great to achieve these outcomes, but you got to look at the risk factors. You got to look at, without getting into the technical details, but things that, artificial intelligence is great when it's very clearly defined and there's checks and balances and all that kind of great stuff in any kind of process. But yeah,
It's
there
just
can be the
like
downsides.
FM, Wayne, compliance and security. These are the bread and sort
Hmm.
of butter of our craft. And
Yeah.
with AI, it should be not just because it talks to you in sort of natural or seems to talk to you in natural language.
Hmm.
Don't leave your professional competence at the door. So
No,
things like
exactly.
guardrails are really critical to AI, architecture. It's the thing that I've been saying for a while now. Um, when your operating model wasn't designed in an information native fashion, then your investment in things like BIM
Yeah.
basically failed to return on investment. When you don't have the right infrastructure support and security around artificial intelligence, it could do anything. And inside that
Yeah.
is significant risk.
Absolutely.
And if you're leaving doors wide open to roll the dice risk, then some people are going to get very, very heavily burnt, in my opinion.
Mhm. No, that's a good point. I mean, and you certainly have to be cognizant of that when you embark on any of these things with the best of intentions and outcomes is the risk side of it. I mean, cybersecurity, I don't think anybody's ever, or any type of security in that general sense, would say that's being overstated because in today's world, for obvious reasons, security and risk and security just like safety, all those things are number one in your considerations. Then you look at all the other things you have to do. But I guess it leads to my next question is what foundational data and governance structures must exist before the AI returns an ROI? Because that, like you said, they're not successful because these things are in place. Either poor data, poor structure, certainly poor governance. But what do you see as has to? That's probably a guidance in and of itself, and part of the standards that are evolving. But to sort of address that.
I mean, there's a lot, to be honest. Again, in whatever you leave as the gray area is where your risk can be hiding.
Hmm.
So, it depends on your model and your needs. But again, from a information perspective, what I quite often reference is there was a building material in the 1970s that was called the Wonder Material, but it had an incomplete set of information against it. Its name was asbestos.
Oh yeah,
So you move from a point of something seemingly being wonderful to
yeah.
then the extreme of you have to now rip it out, and actually you might have severe requirements around ripping it out because of what it is. So
Hmm.
the 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 thing with information is if it's not whole life, it can, is a half truth a lie, is the old sort of saying around this. And in a way, if you don't have that full truth, you are rolling that dice.
Hmm.
I mean, we've all seen it with plant maintenance, or, not everything sort of behaves in the exact same way that you would expect it to. But in that whole life information, you can understand why. But if you can't understand why, then you just take the average, don't you? And you
Yeah,
sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
yeah. On to sustainability and that, I mean, the government's all the benefits too, and some of the things that ESG has been, sort of prominent in for organizations to adopt. I mean, it's a good PR thing, but also it's for the economic and certainly the contributions to the environment. So the ESG has been a hot topic for a number of years, and that's getting then there's even standards for that now evolving and how you go about it. So it's not just like they said the old greenwashing and things that do just something as the latest trend or whatever. But what do you see as sustainability goals as they relate and translate from operational data, decision systems, that sort of thing? I mean, that is part of that, right? You're connecting your ROI cases from FM to ESG and net zero. Net zero is another thing with the built environment. So there's a lot that certainly is rallying around the need for that. But how do you best go about that?
Well, again, I think that's where standards and things like that do have, what's good for China, and there's a lot of geopolitical chaos at the moment, but that
Right.
completely aside,
Yeah.
what's good for China has to be good for Germany, has
Hmm.
to be good for the United States, has to be good for Australia, because if it's good for some and not good for others, then that's not a sustainable nor
That
fair
doesn't
model,
work.
is it?
No, no.
So that's where you need a common version of what does good look like for us all. And that's obviously something you want to have as a standard. We have things like the UN SDGs, which we're kind of standardized around, which is helpful. They're
Hmm.
also quite difficult to operationalize against. But at least it's something we can all work together on and agree there's a common good. I mean, part of the challenge within general society is our principal value metrics, GDP, and that's a pretty rubbish way to measure value of society. It's
Yeah,
just
it is.
it's
It's
just
very,
money.
yeah,
So,
exactly. It doesn't
th-
it doesn't address all of the key components that are of consideration. It's just like a barometer maybe, but at a very, like abstract higher level that doesn't represent obviously the regional differences and something they're more specific to what we would look at, say from an FM perspective, say what does this truly mean? I mean, yeah, the numbers are one thing, and it's great to sort of realize that. I mean, that's part of the saying it's a success. We saved money, but what else? And it's not just savings like within a fiscal year, what a company would look at and say, we implemented this. Here is the investment, the capital we put in. Here's what we, in this year. It's the enduring value, the recurring like savings, and what you did in that mandate to contribute to in a positive. Some of the intangibles, which you can't always put a number on, and can be successfully argued either way. But on FM, back to that sort of where we are in FM and where you see things. Where do you see FM evolving? Say even in the next 5 years, given where we are today. It's come a long way, but
I guess my biggest concern for the next 5 years for FM is if it is particularly in this AI kind of digital world is if we can't clearly define who we are, we'll be defined.
hmm
And that's not advisable to any profession. When you get
no,
put in a box by somebody else, it's a prison possibly. So I think that's a very strong kind of message to us in standards world, but us in FM full stop, is we need to be part of the redefinition of what FM is and be very consistent to the world that that is who we are.
hmm
I mean, the opportunities at the moment to drive smart infrastructure, national outcomes, reduce. I mean, we're 28% of the carbon creation on the planet, so that's not a
hmm
small number.
no,
We circularity can impact, complete social change and value. Our places we know can increase cognitive capability for educational standpoints by, like 10 to 20% with good IEQ. If FM gets it right, it can absolutely become, an absolute rock star rather
hmm
than the forgotten partner left in the basement. So that
no,
to me
absolutely.
is it's a critical 5 years. We're 2030, lots of things are already scheduled to change. So we need to be part of the solution, not the problem by that point in time.
So to provide some insight and encouragement and guidance to those that will be leading in the FM, what capabilities will define the next generation sort of FM leader? It's different than it was even, last 5 years as far as what you needed for more beyond, having your credentials and stuff and obviously experience. But what are the sort of the key areas? I know you're going to say technology, so yeah, you can expand
Well,
on that. But
to
what do
be
you need?
honest, I mean, of course, digital literacy is going to be important for
Yeah,
our people. We don't want to, we want to lead that digital symphony across our estates and our stock, not be a subordinate to that, that maybe
right.
the building tells us what to do. That would be suboptimal. But when you're asking and framing the question, one of the things I think we have a real opportunity around is to kind of harness the emotional intelligence type
hmm
space and really sort of seize on things like anthropology. I think
Right.
facility managers to be this guide to continuous improvement at an organizational level is a very real thing. I think ultimately our colleagues in things like personnel, HR, human resource type thing are obviously at the moment very much responsible for that type of thing from a personal individual perspective, but the place and the space of our buildings has a very similar,
hmm
on more of that collective. So that's why I'm saying anthropology rather than psychology or anything like that. The science of communities and groups and things like that, I absolutely see inside FM's future capabilities. So if we can move from a kind of conversation of uptime through to a conversation of enhanced experience and outcomes
Mhm.
based on activity needs, that's starting to sound, really, really interesting.
No, that's a great point, Gordon. I mean, it's all about the experience. That's exactly what it is. I mean, in the built environment is buildings, but it's the company because that's where their people work to achieve, their objectives to exist, to make money, to thrive, to grow. And that all sounds very straightforward, but it's all behind that, underneath all of that, and all the various complexities, like you said, even in the FM world, we can digress and dive in because of our knowledge and experience in the sector and know what's involved in sort of putting all that together. But at a high level, you don't really see that the clients or the general most people don't sort of have an awareness. They just say, yeah, it sounds like there's a lot involved. Like, there's many different things, but they don't know just exactly what that's comprises. When you start breaking this down into the technical details, when you're going to include these under your tender specs and the contracts for those that are going to help you, move this forward or change these systems or do whatever. It's not it's complex in the sense of it's very comprehensive. Once you break it down, it's not complex, but it's just like a lot of components and moving parts that you got to bring together, and it's being able to understand that from a high level and then being able to implement that operationally and then see that right through on the life cycle, so that you are making progress and you are making returns and it is a success.
Yeah.
And it's planning for that, do planning, like just the risk that's involved. Nobody can understate the risk, but I think you're right. Back to the standards is that's the whole purpose of having this. I mean, some companies prior to that, it was just best practice, and maybe they, intensified their efforts, and maybe they had more budgets and staff or whatever, or they're just fortunate to have more people with more experience and knowledge to sort of facilitate, furthering an initiative in their FM mandate, and that company is a success. But it's making it so all companies can have that same like leveling the playing field. So your engagement in all of these various is in technology, but I would have to say, yeah, the convergence of technology, the growth of that area. It's almost, and with AI, it's like in the last few years, just exponential where we need to go, and the guidance that's between the evolution of those standards and what you're working on and what I'm involved to some degree as well in the FM. It's also the awareness and then the support for the FM folks that are going to drive this, or the companies that are going to move this forward. They still need it's one thing to say, hey, we've got these great standards, but it's now they have to understand them, embrace them, and implement them, and that in itself. And I don't just mean as a supporting the consultants that do that. It's obviously they have to be able to, be able make that work, eh?
Yeah, and again, get that experience and then play back into the international pot. At the moment, we've got one international standard that we're working on in digital data and technology, which is project led by someone from the UK. We've got two at European level that has, again, I would probably say half of the people involved in one are from the UK. The other one's a lot more Scandinavian heavy. That's the one that's much more like BIM, getting
Hmm.
into area and space measurement. But that's as I say, the UK's been doing this and leading this internationally for quite some time. But you know,
Absolutely.
there's loads of other great things, things like Neighbours that's coming out of the Australian market,
Hmm.
and
Yep.
that this is where, like I say, it is quite early, but now's the time for people to get involved to help us shape it, because
Yeah.
what does good look like in Canada isn't going to be exactly the same as what good looks like in the UK. So
Sure.
if we want to create internationally inclusive standards, then we need other people to sort of to play into that. Like you say, Canada didn't even have its mirror committee until you helped to set that up. But Canada's had buildings for a little bit longer than that. So
Yeah. It was kind of shocking because I mean, when you look at ISO standards, they cover so many different areas, like for manufactured products and this and that. and you name it, it's there, globally. But certainly, what's so I was kind of shocked that we would be involved in other things, electrical safety, whatever, manufactured products, whatever it might be, in industrial sense too of different things. But yet, this was totally devoid of any participation. But
Mm.
um, yeah, I think that's what it's really about. Now, on that note, I mean, I was happy to sort of, and at GFMA, we sponsor the TC267 website, which we have. So we had our thing, we do that, and we're putting together, we put a list of the FM standards. But is there a thing, we can maybe just for our viewers, that can put in the after the fact, circulate to the attendees, anybody else, and we can do a post on LinkedIn of just standards in general. Like there's 45,000 for safety, there's 55,000 for yes. We know what they are, but a lot of people don't, and they may not even know the FM ones. We have what we have on the TC267 .org website, but then that's just the FM ones. But is there anything else we can provide as a
We
link or
can,
something?
as part of the ISO work going on just now, there was a mapping done to about 74
Okay.
standards, which is maybe too much, but we can probably, thin that down to the top 10, 20 most relevant or something like that and
Yeah,
share.
because your health and safety, the things that have been adopted. Because I look at two companies that I used to work for, big companies, global international companies, and they've adopted like 45,000 for the health and safety. So, because of the wide application, it was always they had the local jurisdictional ones like here in Ontario, here and like locally, they would have their provincial or like, the localized regional standards, which they would always have, or certainly from a country perspective, federal standards. But when you start seeing these things adopted and consistent globally, and the pooling, there again, it's the pooling of best practice too. I think it's the sharing of information, as you state, Gordon, and really
Yeah.
sort of the awareness and creating the excitement to sort of do better and have the resources to do that. And there's always benefits. I mean, saving money, saving the environment, those are sort of, I wouldn't say side benefits, but those are things you will realize. But it's really what you should be doing, and really getting to, just so it becomes changing the mindset, a way of doing business. We live and breathe that. So it's we're preaching to the choir, but it's all those that are unaware or have very little knowledge that need to be, and certainly those that are decision makers in the C-suite to say, yeah, good idea. They don't care about the details, but if they have to sign off
Right.
on something, they need to be able to understand the concept and it's what does this really mean? And it's hard to sort of crystallize that in this sort of complex changing world because there's a lot happening. So, it's overwhelming, even like I said, for those that are tech savvy. How do you like where do you start, So it's like,
Um,
yeah,
I mean, there's two things that quickly we can share because in our ISO capacities, it's public published data that
yeah,
you could put on the 267 website that
right.
shows liaisons from us and to us. So that tells you from an
Hmm.
international point of view what our TC has capacity to think is important. And
Absolutely.
then there's another thing from my UK national program work that we've got, as I mentioned earlier, the information management initiative. So although there's a bit of British standards mixed into that, you can start to
Sure.
see from that how the spider web kind of
Hmm.
spans. But yeah, happy to collaborate with you and think what that might could look
Yeah, I
like.
was just going to say, even just putting a brief 1 or 2 page compendium document, so to speak, as a guide, and then just kind of break it out, categorize it, and then just say, here's where you go, here's the links. And then you can always create some kind of working paper supporting document on key focus areas. But if they have that as a sort of a
Yeah.
guidance, a
I
roadmap
could
of a
probably do one of
compendium
my
to say,
infographics.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, you do some really cool ones that they're always,
Yeah.
the power of a between that's what I think is the technology is great, but you know what's even better? The technology is when you have people like yourself and other people that have all this wealth of knowledge and experience, and they meld that with the technology. It's the result, the synergistic, the results of that, the benefits are far greater than any technology you
Exactly.
could harness in and of itself. So yeah, you're right. It's really cool when you can say when it's what's behind that technology and the results you can create with that combination. So you'll never, no matter how much we evolve on the technology side, you'll never remove that human element, and nor do you want to. It'd be, kind of a crazy world where you hear about these science fiction stories, but no, to that point, it's nice what we can achieve. So we've answered most of the questions. We had a couple of questions which I brought up about the standards at the end. Didn't have any more, but we're just up on the hour, just passed, and great to take your time. Happy to have you take your time to speak to these timely, important topics, Gordon. And
No problem.
love to have you back again, and we can focus on maybe a key topic or something, and this information resource to those that are in the industry and not in the profession or not. It's a valuable knowledge, and I'm
Yeah.
sure it's interesting. So really appreciate your time today, and
Enjoyed it, Wayne.
look forward to having you back.
Have a nice weekend when it gets to
Yeah.
you.
Okay. Take care. Bye for now.
Cheers. Cheers.